Just before we start, we all know that there's a problem in academia with people not getting paid for the work they're doing, particularly younger scholars. We at the project want to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. So we need your help to do that. If you can afford to donate £1 a month to support this project and keep it free forever, please go to our Patreon page at patreon.com/projectrs and sign up there. If you want to make a one-off donation, you can do that too through our PayPal button on the homepage. But together we can help to change the culture of exploitation in academia. That's patreon.com/projectrs. Now here's the episode. It's Monday. That can mean only one thing. Time to go back to work. Oh no, wait, two things. It's Religious Studies Project Day. I'm David Robertson.
I'm Christopher Cotter, and we're giving away our hegemonic context there by saying what happens on Mondays. Who knows what happens on Mondays, David? Who knows? Dude?
Well,
You're making a lot of presumptions there.
In catering, they call Monday the catering weekend because they've been working hard all weekend and then they get their day off on Monday.
Fantastic.
When everybody, well, a sizable proportion, but not everybody goes to work.
That's true. That is true.
Whether you're sleeping off a hangover or whether you're at work or conceivably both, we're the Religious Studies Project. We're here for you.
We are indeed. And we are brought to you, as ever, by the British Association for the Study of Religions, the North American Association for the Study of Religion, and the International Association for the History of Religions. Big shout out to those guys. Thanks so much. This week, we've got an interview that Sammy Bishop recorded for us at the BSA SOCREL conference back over the summer. She recorded it with James Spickard on alternative sociologies of religion through non-Western eyes. And I'm really looking forward to this interview. Shall we hand straight over to Sammy?
Let's.
Hi, I'm Sammy Bishop. I'm here with the RSP at SOCREL 2017. I'm here with Professor James Spickard from the University of Redlands. So thank you for joining us today.
Well, sure.
Great. So we're here to talk about your newest publication, Alternative Sociologies Through Non-Western Eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us first a little bit about how you came to work on this topic?
Well, every project is complex. And like every other scholar in the world, I'm in the midst of a series of conversations with various folks. I technically have a religious studies degree, but I'm trained in anthropology and sociology. And I'm one of those few people who doesn't make a distinction between them, except historically. So I'm very I'm a theorist. I'm primed to look and see what the underlying presumptions are of any way of understanding whatever the phenomenon is. And since I'm studying religion and growing in the American context, I've been reasonably appalled at the kinds of things that the American context can't seem to understand. The first one of those that came up during the 90s with the inability of American sociology of religion to actually grasp experience in religious settings. I did my first field work on one of the new Japanese religions where the practitioners tried to do something called Jōrei, which, crudely put, it involves projecting invisible light out of the palms of people's hands to clean the clouds off their spiritual bodies. And you can imagine why an anthropologist would be interested in this. And I learned all sorts of wonderful anthropological things about it. And frankly, I don't much care what Jōrei was, but it was the thing that attracted everybody. And the discipline of sociology of religion said, oh, no, that can't be possible. That can't be right. Something else must be going on. There must be, the deprivation hypothesis or something like that. Crap. And so it wasn't until a couple of folks did a survey where they asked a bunch of people involved with Asian religions, why are you attracted to it? And it wasn't the social life, and it wasn't the connection with other people, and it wasn't deprivation. It was, hey, dude, something happens when we're sitting in meditation. And the discipline had no concepts for dealing with it. So Barry Jo Knights and I wrote a couple of articles about that, and put together a series of ways of thinking about that. And I ended up working on some pieces based in Navajo religion, where you don't have churches, you don't have priests, you've got myths, you've got belief systems, but there aren't doctrines. But you got these 9-day and night ceremonies, and they were typed as symbolic, but they're not symbolic. I mean, why would you do something symbolism for 9 days a night? It's based on the experience. It picks people up in one place and moves them and puts them to someplace else. That, one thing leads to another there, and I began working on Confucian ways of seeing, what's sacred in the Confucian tradition. I was doing stuff on human rights and on the notion of, I encountered the Confucian notion of human rights, which is a very different notion than in the West, and trying to get at that from the inside. And they really followed a series of contemporary Neo-Confucians into this notion of the relation self. And the self is constructed quite differently in Confucianism than it is in the West. And the sacred relationships, it really is all about relationships. And the sacred inheres in the connections between people and the practice, the maintenance of li, which we call ritual propriety, but it's the maintenance of the relationships that create the self and create the social community generates virtue, but virtue isn't individual. Virtue is collective. So it's a whole different way of thinking about things. And so I got these two things going on, and then I got interested in the work of Ibn Khaldun, that 19th or the 14th century Arab jurist who has a way of, he thinks about a concept called al-asabiyya, or group feeling, and it's a form of social solidarity that is centripetal. It's draws things to the center rather than being boundary oriented. But he treats that al-asabiyya as something that is generated by kinship, but also by Islam. And so, I've got these three things. Well, what do I do with this stuff? And it struck me that there was a narrative here. Mm-hmm. There's where I end up, and I think the underlying place of this book is that those are the three examples, but they're not exhaustive. The argument is that all of our concepts, including Western concepts and Western sociological concepts, are historically, culturally grounded. That is, they arise out of a particular time and place. And reading Manuel Vasquez's article in Religions on the Edge, which is the theme of this book that generated the theme of this conference, Vasquez points out the way in which in Sociology's origins, sociology treated religion as the other, and so secularization approaches are built into sociology from the very beginning. And that was more articulate than I'd been able to get at it. And so you have the beginning of a narrative. Mm-hmm. And I had already studied how religion is presented in American sociology textbooks. And it is all about belief and organizations and morality, and it's isolated in its own chapter. Just as sociology of religion is isolated in the discipline at large. So what was the default view? What is that? How was it created? How is it an historical cultural product that then lets us see certain things really, really well, but not see other things, not see experience, not see relationship, etc. So that's the opening of the book. Uh-huh. And then there's a chapter there where I dive deep. I love writing this stuff because you actually get to dive deeply into things and read everybody in the world and dive into the Confucian material. And then I take that and as you've read in that chapter on where I apply it, what would a Confucian sociologist see about American church life or church life in Europe, but I'm dealing with the American case here. What would the sociologists see that we don't normally see?
Mm.
And the Confucian case is probably the most striking, that despite the patriarchalism of Chinese religion and of Chinese culture in general, who maintains the sacred relationships that keep the congregation together? It's the women cooking the church suppers. Or as in the African American church, it's called kitchen ministry. They've got a name for it. And it isn't always women, just women in African American churches. In Midwestern Protestantism, it is all women, and there's a long history of church suppers as forming the basis of the social church. In San Antonio, on the west side of San Antonio, which is a Latina area, people are nominally Catholic, but people don't really attend church very often. But there are women who will put on Christmas plays, and they will do what they call a promesa, which is, if your nephew gets off drugs or something like that, you promise El Niño Dios that I will do one of these plays, and then she'll feed the neighborhood, and the play people, the actors come and they do the pastoral play of the shepherds and Jesus, and it's a religious event, but it never doesn't happen in a church, and so these women are not counted as religious in American, quantitative sociology. They're just not. Mm. We miss all of this richness because we don't see it. And so the relational notion, it wouldn't necessarily put women at the center, but it empirically puts them at the center, which is this lovely irony. And sociology doesn't do that. Sociology ignores the role of women, by and large. Mm-hmm. So, then there's 2 chapters on Ibn Khaldun and 2 chapters on what the Navajo or what you would do with a Navajo approach, and one of them outlines what the Navajo have to do, how Navajo philosophy works, and the notion of ritual is creating the original beauty order. It's a hozo is the term, creating the beauty order, etc. That was present at the creation. And at the creation, it was done in the myth by thought and speech. Long Life Boy and Happiness Girl, who take out this bundle, and they unroll the bundle and they do the sand painting. And that's what happens in a ceremony. They unroll the bundle, they do the sand painting, they recreate the original perfection, and people experience that connection. So then I take that and apply it. And this was actually an article I'd written in 2005, based on 13 years of field work with a radical Catholic group, that you can read the house mass that group does every week, or did at that time every week, as a way of recreating the world, a sense of rightness, a sense of beauty and order, in the lives of people who spend their time working with homeless folks, or sitting in at the cathedral because the bishop isn't spending enough money on poor people, or sitting in at City Hall so that they will release porta potties so that the poor people don't have to, put their stuff all over the street. Those are, how do you recreate that world? Well, it's the ritual that does it. And there's other things too, but the overall argument is that if we go to these other places and take a look at what other concepts are there, it's like if you're a photographer, and I'm a photographer, so you hold the camera, you point the camera at something, you frame it based on, you take a photo, you get something, you see something. If you take 20 steps around to your right or left and take a picture, you'll see something else. And so what I'm advocating is that if we look at these other cultural settings, these other historical cultural places, we can get notions, we can locate our camera in different places. The 3 I happen to choose are ones, there are others, I suggest some in the last chapter, but I can only handle 3. Mm-hmm. from the first article that dealt with some of this stuff to now, I think it's been 28 years. No, 26 years. Which is a long time. Thank you very much. But the project really is the project really only gelled about 11 years ago. So anyway, that's a long answer to a short question. And
that's great.
Where do you want to go next?
Well, one thing that we could ask would be why you chose to, or why you prefer to go to these other perspectives, such as the Navajo or the Chinese Confucian perspective, rather than looking for relational theories kind of closer to home?
Well, you can get there by going closer to home. And when I first looked at experience, wrote the first set of articles on experience, I went two places. One to the work of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who's an American sociologist, well, Hungarian, but Hungarian-American psychologist, who looks at the phenomenon of attention and how when you attend to something deeply, the ego shifts, and the experience of the ego, in that strict Husserlian phenomenological sense, the experience that you have of the world changes. And I went to that, and I went to the work of Alfred Schutz, particularly his article on making music together. And Mary Jo Knights and I wrote a piece on that, coming out of feminist theory and my coming out of whatever it is I come out of. But we're fellow travelers on this particular trip. And those were spots in the Western tradition where we could find it. And Schutz basically argues, and I think he's right, when you listen to music, it's a polythetic experience. That is, there are multiple things happening. It unrolls in time, and rituals unroll in time. You can't grasp a ritual just like you can't grasp in a symphony in a set of words, but you have to play it again. And if you don't play it again, then you lose something. And putting the two, Csikszentmihalyi and Schutz together, one of the things rituals does is it focuses our attention in different places. And how well you know the ritual. Csikszentmihalyi talks about the distinction between the difference between anxiety and boredom. If you know it too well, you're bored. If you don't well at all, you're anxious. If you're exactly on the right spot, then your experience transforms. And so I'm using that. I'm using it to look at Navajo ritual, but I'm also using the Navajo theology to look at the Catholic ritual because of what does it accomplish? It rights the world again. It puts the world back in order. And I think that's significant. Sure, you can get there in another way. Nobody has. Sure, you don't have to go to China to find out about relationalism. Nobody's done it. And my complaint, my criticism, and I said this in my review of the book Religion on the Edge, is that people are laying out all of these critiques of standard sociology. And then what they put in their place are really not very good understandings of symbolic interactionism, not even going to Mead's philosophy of the act, where there really is some good stuff, but going back to Goffman, going to things that don't actually produce anything new. So the wish is fine, but there's no delivery. If you go, it's like traveling. You go someplace else, here I'm sitting, an American sitting at a British conference. People think differently. I mean, what are two countries divided by the same language? That's not my line. It's probably Churchill. I don't know who it is. But you begin to see things in a different way. And so I think it's important, for example, to go and read Ibn Khaldun, even though we don't have a cyclical, I didn't go to his cyclical notion of history. And, Brian Turner at one point wrote that the problem with Khaldun is he has no theory of modernization. Well, that's right. But that isn't where you go in this case. What are the concepts that work? And then realizing, and we think of him as a historian, he thought himself as a judge in the Islamic tradition. He was trying to, justify Islam, and a particular kind of anti-Sufi Islam, which we might call Islamism today, based on the ability of that Islam to overcome kin divisions and create a larger community where people are tied together by group feeling. Well, those are really interesting ideas. What do they illumine about a particular case that we wouldn't otherwise see? In that case, since I haven't described that one yet, I go to I use that lens to look at the miracles of Medjugorje in Bosnia, the Marian apparition in Bosnia in 1981 and ongoing. And that was in the sociological literature as a religious experience and as a religious event. And of course it was. And then 10 years later, they have this ethnic war in that place, which is then described as an ethnic experience and an ethnic event, which of course it was. What's the relationship between the two of these? Is religion creating social solidarity, which then becomes tied up with the ethnic line, because you can't tell a Croat from a Serb unless you ask them, or a Bosniak, unless you ask them what prayers they learned as a child. Is it an instrumental way of killing people? And in that case, I actually decide that Ibn Khaldun doesn't do it right, because he has this center-focused notion of solidarity that's pulling people together. And the war makes it very clear that this was an edge-focused way of dividing people. But we still learn something by putting ethnicity and religion in the same frame, where they do not appear in standard sociology. Could we get there? Sure, we could get there. Nobody's done it. I mean, it standardly isn't done. And so that's why I did this. Now, that's reason one. There's reason two, which is my previous book, I write slowly, is on ethnography, and particularly on reflexive ethnography in the study of religion, and it brought some of the material from anthropology into sociology and into religious studies about the notion of how ethnographers need to be aware of their own position in the process of doing their ethnography. And there's one of the articles in there has 8 different levels of representation in the ethnographic process. And after it got published, I didn't write that one, but it's a brilliant piece by Sean Landris. I discovered there's a 9th. But, these are the kinds of things we have to think about. Ethnography is now sort of de rigueur that it's reflexive. We are not in the historical cultural position of late 19th century France and Germany and the United States. We're in this sort of emerging global world where there are connections all over the place. It's after colonialism, but it's not post-colonial. And that's particularly true because the post-colonial people are still doing anti-colonialism, effectively. But we're in a world where we have to begin thinking about it as not a unipolar world. And there's a long history in sociology, not just American, and in anthropology as well. We make the concepts, we export the concepts, folks in other places apply those to their own situations and frequently misunderstand what's going on. Not their fault. And there's been a counter push to, okay, how do you develop indigenous sociologies and so on? And the ISA has sponsored a few. Some of them are worthwhile, some of them are not. But we're not in a world, we're in a world where we're beginning to have to talk to one another and learn from one another and so on. And so the second reason for going elsewhere is to remind ourselves that, we're not the center of the universe. Probably my favorite line in the book is the line that in the second to the last chapter, where only men are allowed to imagine that there's no such thing as gender. Only white people are allowed to imagine that there's no such thing as race. Only heterosexuals are allowed to imagine that there is no such that there are not these wonderful and glorious and multiple forms of sexuality, and only people living at the center of the empire can imagine the empire doesn't matter. So that's where we are, and here I am, a white male, heterosexual inhabitant of the empire, and I can't forget that. And so what are the responsibilities of, how do we move from that polarity to something where we are all, at least in conversation with another? And I spend the last couple of chapters wrestling with the questions of Orientalism, the questions of cultural appropriation, the questions of what is the epistemological grounding of really what a global sociology would be. And my first title for the book, the one I sent it to the publisher with, was Through Non-Western Eyes Towards a World-Conscious Sociology of Religion. And in many ways, that's the best description of what the book is about. The marketing department, of course, said, nope, can't do that. We want global sociology. I said, no, that's white male, blah, 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 blah. And so we fought for a month and 2 months, and then the editor came up with the title we have. I received the copy of the book the day after alternative facts became American political meme. And part of me said, oh my God. And the other part of me said, instant karma for the marketing department. And yet it also does describe what's going on. Because it's not saying these are the only ways to do things, but these are 3 models of what we could be doing. And there's, the late Otto Maduro was dealing with a Nahuatl concept of Texclopate, having to do with Latino religious agency. And Nigerian Professor Akewowo was dealing with some Yoruba concepts. And there's some other people who've pursued these. They're great. They're beyond me. I mean, I can't dive into all of those. I'd be doing this for, the next 40 lifetimes. Mm-hmm. But the stuff is out there. Some of it's good, some of it is. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. Some of the stuff that I think works might not work as well as, I think it does. Other things that I think don't work might work better. But this is the conversation we have to be having. So there's a sense that what I'm trying to do here is, well, as the subtitle, I'm decentering the sociology of religion, which is the subtitle of that Bender et al. Book. That's the theme of the conference.
One final question. How do you hope the book might be used by other scholars or students?
I hope people will read it. You always want people to read your book. And in this case, one of the reasons it takes me so long to write is I try to write for, I don't just write for specialists. I try to have the prose be readable by people who are, literate, interested in things. I actually write for my father, but he's dead, so I don't actually write for him. But somebody who can understand, who is not a scholar, but can understand well-reasoned arguments. So I tell stories. And other people will have stories. And what I hope is that people will understand what it is I'm trying to do, and then figure out ways that they might want to do something similar. At the end of, I think, well, there are a whole series of fellow travelers here, because I'm not the only person doing this. Raymond Connell's book, Southern Theory, it's a fellow traveler with that. And in that book, she looks at a very Western question about the nature of colonialism, but from the point of view of people who have been suffering from colonialism. Not the same question, but parallel. Mary Jo Knights's work on feminist theory, feminist sociologies of religion is a connected work. Meredith McGuire's work on lived religion is these are things breaking down the sort of standard model of how religion works and looking at things through other lenses. Now, I of course have criticisms of all of those and things that they catch and things that they don't catch, but that doesn't matter. If people read this appreciate the stories, figure out, oh, well, how does this change how I think about what it is I'm doing? And what might I do differently? That's great. And if people then say, okay, I'm going to engage with people who are really coming from a fundamentally different place. This is the ethnographer in me. You know, I said I go, my first field work was with one of the new Japanese religions, where I had to immerse myself in a completely different way of thinking about the world. And that, I think that's kind of our duty at this point. You know, unless we want to ignore the fact that there's an empire around us, and I can't do that.
Professor Spickard, thank you very much for your time.
Sure.
Thanks so much for that, Sammy, and also Professor Spickard, of course. Great to hear Sammy stepping up to the mic to do some interviews for us. She has been a big mover and shaker behind the scenes here at the RSP for about a year now.
Well, at least a year, yeah. She's written some pieces for us, now recording interviews, and she's our sales and marketing editor, and indeed set up our Patreon account, which the last time I checked now had 9 subscribers. Hey, it might have more now. That was a couple of days ago, but thank you to all of you who have subscribed. We're aiming for 100. So, you know, we're nearly 10% of the way there. So if you are listening and you think that the RSP is worth $1 a month, why not simply log on? I mean, that's less than basically anything in the West.
Less than even one coffee. None of this money is going into Chris and I's pockets. This is all going to develop the project and support people who are giving up hours of their time every week for nothing to bring you this podcast. We want to be able to support them and not to be part of the ongoing problem of people being asked to work for nothing in academia. So, you know, we really, really appreciate you doing this. It's not for our benefit. It's for this discipline in the field and academia more generally.
Thanks for that, David. So you can come back next week, listeners, to hear a interview, the second in our NGO series, and it's called Beyond Faith-Based Organizations, Religion and NGOs in Comparative Perspective. So that interview is going to be asking a lot of critical questions about the particularly in the UK context, there's a real contemporary discourse on faith-based organizations and the sort of utilitarian use by the state. So looking forward to that.
Absolutely. It's turning into a very, very interesting series indeed. Come back for the Ops Digest. Is that a Tuesday these days?
It is indeed.
On a Tuesday. And our responses on Thursday as regular. Other than that, Chris, the only thing that needs to be said is...
thanks for listening.
The Religious Studies Project is sponsored by the British Association for the Study of Religions, the North American Association for the Study of Religion, and the International Association for the History of Religions.
Brought to you by founders and editors-in-chief Chris Cotter and David Robertson, and managing editor Thomas J. Coleman III. Our features are edited by Jonathan Tuckett, and our Opportunities Digest by Jana Shirley. Podcast transcription by Helen Bradstock, with audio assistance from Gregory Schneider and Samuel Ward. Social media managed by Ray Radford, and sales and marketing by Sammy Bishop.
Don't forget, you can support the project using our amazon.com, .co.uk and .ca links, or by donating at patreon.com/projectrs. And you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, YouTube, iTunes, and other portals.